Good morning and good afternoon, LinkedIn friends, Value First Nation. Welcome to another episode of Value First Leadership with Tony Dowling. It's how you doing, Tony? It's been a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a while. We drift apart and come back together. We always come back together, but it's great to be back. And good afternoon. Yeah, it's we've got a couple of changes to the clock coming up, haven't we? So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we are, other than you're one end of the day and I'm the other end of the day.
Yeah, I
But
think
it's
we
great to
got
be back.
six or seven between us. Yeah, I look forward to AI just handling that. Um,
Yeah.
and I think we're getting close. I feel like Claude is not I'm not having to remind him of the date and, like,
Oh,
whatever recent update they've done where it's, like, checking chats all the time and it's checking context. Yeah, so I think we're almost there where it's like, just, focus on being present and let the time and the logistics take care of
yeah,
themselves.
absolutely.
Right. Well, good to get back to this series with you, um, where we had left it, and maybe I don't know if I realized this during this time with you, but I realized it helps to just kind of read through whatever principle we're talking about for the day, and then we'll dive in. But just as a refresher, since we stopped doing this in August, we had already gone through the first three principles or commitments of value first leadership. And number one was we will create conditions for value rather than controlling outcomes. Number two, we will distribute authority to where knowledge naturally exists. And number three, we will illuminate paths rather than dictate routes. And as I say this last one, and I'm going to read through number four here,
Mm.
sounds very similar. But the thing I love about the breakdown of this whole value first is that we're trying to address all the nuance that gets in the way. So it's going to be similar language in places, but when you look at it through a different lens, you can see how companies have been struggling with this. So, number four today is we will ask powerful questions rather than provide answers. We believe leadership's wisdom emerges through inquiry more than instruction. We commit to using questions that activate collective intelligence and enable discoveries that no single perspective could achieve alone. This means we will lead through curiosity rather than certainty and positioning ourselves as having all the answers. We will create space for exploration before rushing to solutions. We will use questions that expand thinking rather than narrow options. We will develop organizational capacity for critical thinking at all levels rather than concentrating analysis at the top. And we will value diverse perspectives over conformity of thought. Uh, Easier said than done. Hey, Tony?
Yeah, very, very much. And I think just to kick it off, really, there are two aspects which may be why this is one of the more difficult things to achieve from a leadership perspective. If you are a leader, you might want to practice this. You may have a natural tendency, although it's unlikely, it is possible. But unless you get the both elements right, and the elements are the first element is the one of psychological safety. So this is extremely difficult to do in a typically industrial dynamic. To create a team who feel safe and, being blunt, who feel that they're able to fail. It's extremely difficult to do, right? Because without that, you don't get they don't take the responsibility. If they're going to get punished, and in reality, maybe not what you say, but what you do, if they're going to get punished in some way, even if it's a throwaway remark, or a bit of a bit of office banter or whatever, any of these things will really quickly put an end to your development of the autonomous mind, the team. And the other thing, that's one that's relatively difficult in the first place. But the second is you've also got to then teach people to be autonomous. You've got to teach people to be able to make decisions, and that's where the questions come in, I think. So there was something that you said in there as well, Chris. I think is quite important. You know, we're not trying to we're not patronizing people or patronizing as maybe you'd say in the US here. We're not like asking two questions, either of which will lead the person to the solution. We're not talking about like tricking people into doing what you wanted them to do in the first place, right? There's a really this is a big deal within the organization. This is a big deal. What we're going to say is I am actually going to, now that I've taught you to act appropriately, now that I've taught you, I've empowered you, I've enabled you, whatever you want to call it, right? Because you can't just say to people, yeah, go on. You take the risk. You can't just do that, right? Now that I've taught you to do that and I've ensured your psychological safety, if you do mess up, it's fine. We're all learning together, right? Now that you've done that, you've then got to stand back and let it happen. So I guess there's almost maybe even three parts to it in terms of what I'm thinking of. Yes, you've got to create the psychological safety, but you've got to teach people how to make the decisions. You do that through the questions. And then you've got to put up with them. Or at
Yeah.
least create a mechanism, right? And this is, you can agree this with your team. Look, if you're going to spectacularly explode, if I think in my judgment and experience that this is going to go like extremely wrong, extremely quickly, and under that condition, I will step in. Is that okay with everybody? You know, you're not going to get blamed. You're going to have that kind of, or not. I mean, maybe not. Maybe
Well,
not.
this is why it's hard, I think, for leaders because to your number three, you're still accountable for the result,
Of course,
right?
of course.
And that's why it's easier to step in and make sure it gets done or direct. And like one of the, as I was coming up with this framework earlier this year, like, oh, this might even have been after the AI summit, where it's just this theme. It was after the 2 weeks we did, where everybody, all of the 10 pillars we were talking about, the theme of learned helplessness,
Yep,
like
yep, yep.
kept coming up, and it got added into the core beliefs of Value First, where we're trying for empowerment over learned helplessness. Probably the most damaging like result of the industrial complex and all the traps that we talk about, because especially when you hire talented people and then teach them that they're not empowered, that it's not in their best interest to think critically or come up with ideas because they're working in a system where they don't have any decision making power or authority and everything has to be run up the chain. And even in those moments where even if like it will likely get approved, like the fact that you have to go up the chain and go through like where we might do that a couple times, but it's also not the job. Like I'm responsible for doing something else on the daily. And every time you ask me, it's just there's a mental
Mm,
drain and just all
mm,
these different effects of handling it in this
mm,
way. And I'm glad you brought up like the hard part is if you've been doing it in a way where there hasn't been psychological safety, where this hasn't been the mode of operations, you don't just get to go and say, okay, guys, it's on you. Like, go ahead, like, figure it out yourselves. You're free to ask questions and make it look like you might not know the answer, like when they just got out of or they're still in a culture that says that's a bad idea,
mm. Yeah,
right?
no, and you will end up again. I mean, and we see it time and time. You'll end up then nurturing. It's a bit like if you prune your rose bush, it'll grow in a certain way. And if you create an environment where the people who can navigate that process, that mental load of always having to run things up the chain and then wait for budgets to come through and so on and so on, all you're doing is constantly reinforcing that culture within the organization. So the longer the organization goes on for, so it's like take McKinsey and the 7 S's or something, that literally every consultant, and I'm going to talk about consultants a little bit in a moment because it's sort of related anyway, but McKinsey work the same way every single time because they reinforce culturally, they reinforce that approach, the 7 S's approach, right? So if you have a political orientation within your organization, if only certain people fit in and only certain people get a yes and only certain people can ask for this and that, you end up reinforcing it. And I think it's why one of the reasons why companies go through this product life cycle of introduction and growth, and then maturity, and then decline. It's almost like the Roman Empire. Nothing lasts forever. You'll eventually get to the place where you've polluted yourself so much that the organization starts to fall down. And what it's really interesting, actually, just as an aside, it's really interesting how fast now, how quickly these things seem to happen in today's world. We started with digital orientation. Your Amazons and Facebooks and so on. And now we're seeing it in the OpenAIs and the Anthropics of this world, where these like lessons, these developments that would take decades are happening seemingly in weeks. It's
Yeah.
absolutely fascinating. But I digress. Yeah. So
Well, I think that's a good point because this is why this part is so important.
yes.
An AI, an intelligent layer of infrastructure is being added to human civilization. And that layer's whole goal is to empower humans. So we're bombarded with it. And if you got people in an org locked away and you think you're going to protect them and continue the command and control, like it's not happening. Like we can't stop but being exposed to it. If you give me a new phone, like I'm constantly getting, oh, do you want to try this thing you've never been able to do before? Right. And the more that we're exposed to that opportunity, and then we directly translate it, even with AI tools, it's been documented already. Like when I'm using GPT at home or Claude, and then I have to come to work and use Copilot, and it's a very different experience because you don't have your shit together as an organization, basically. Like we're not going to continue signing up for a worse way of doing things, and it's a moment. And like if I could like try to give you a practical example of how like keep on seeing people right now talk about cleaning up their data, like in the CRM specifically. Well, once you get it cleaned up, the chances that it's going to happen again are very high unless you deal with things like this and process, because it's very likely that there was somebody involved in the beginning of the process that's like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why are you requiring that field? I was at an event last week where companies are getting merged together and the sales people can see it from a mile away. This company refers to all of the industries and target markets differently. And that's not going to matter to me. And I'm going to have to select things from drop downs that don't make sense. So they opt out. Right. And then the data gets dirty again. And when they maybe raise their hand the first time and say, yeah, that doesn't make sense, I think we should do it like this, and then it's not accepted, especially the best salespeople, like they don't have time for that. And they say, okay, I tried. I'm going to keep doing my job
Yeah.
to make
And
money for me and my family and the business and all the
that's where the
KPIs.
adoption drops off. It's such a really good real world example. And I think our friend Clement talks about this in a really nice way when he talks about viewing your data as ongoing projects. So let's do this massive cleanse, and then we're out the other side, which you never are. We're out the other side. We've done it. We've finished it, and then a year later or 6 months later, you're back in the same place. Well, there was no point in doing it. But if all you're ever going to do is reinforce those same pathways that led you to that point, that's all you're ever going to get. And I do wonder sometimes if organizations aren't pre-programmed, predestined to move through this cycle of innovation into hideboundness. When they start, they're innovative, fast-moving, agile, all the things, and then as they get bigger, create processes, the cultures change, the objectives change, the why are we here change. You see it in startups. Sometimes startups become what they are because of the values, Zappos and organizations like that, and then suddenly there's something else, and something's lost from that,
Yeah.
and it's not what it was. The organization isn't what it was, and it never will be again. You might argue HubSpot, interestingly, since the extraordinarily impressive chief exec has come on in place of the founders, HubSpot has changed its personalities. Whatever
Mhm.
you may think of the various people, and it's going strength to strength, but it's changed. It's not the
Yeah.
organization it was before. So
And
you
and
could
this
argue. Sorry, go on.
well, this might be a new talk track, man. Like what came to mind is like planned obsolescence
Yeah,
is built in to like industrial capitalism. Like,
exactly.
right. And what I've never connected that to is I always say like it's best to think of your product as the experience, right? And if that's the case, well, so it's the case in practice, whether or not you like decide and design for that is something else. But let's say you do, your people and your process are a big part of that. And if you are inherently planning obsolescence, like for the different seasonal changes or whatever, you're going to either have to reskill those resources or like replace and refresh. It's literally built into the product roadmap,
100%. 100%.
right?
So the only way to kick back up off the maturity curve, the cash cow, if you talk about Boston Consultancy Matrix, um, is to innovate again. And hidebound organizations, anybody who's worked really hard to create processes, to create consistent experience, to create products at a certain level, finds innovation extraordinarily difficult. Extraordinarily difficult. And there's I heard it. I don't know whether this is true or not, but a good friend of mine, Chris Dubois, you may know Chris, told me last week that there's a thing called Krulak's law. Have you come across this? So I'm always being fascinated by what the military know in terms of leadership and what businesses practice. It feels to me that the militaries of the world, for better or worse, again, know an awful lot more about leadership than businesses do. And this guy Krulak, who's apparently a general, effectively came up with the idea that you have to empower your frontline employees. You have to empower your privates, if you like, right? The generals are too far removed from the action to be able to make decisions, to be able to take actions, to be able to innovate. And if you look at, even you go back to sort of Victorian times and you look at the introduction of schools and everything else, everything about big business is about conforming. It's about getting people to do the things they need to do, even creating machines that literally required the same a minimum of movement, a maximum of efficiency to turn the same thing out over and over and over and over again. That's what you're dealing with. That's the problem you have as an organization. And today is not the answer. The answer is creativity. And we've worked for a long time to drum that out of our kids in school, to drum it out of our organizations. And you've only got to look at the downside of LLMs at the minute, the whole um, hallucination thing, to know that people lack such critical thinking that there are lawyers, getting reported for using ChatGPT's case law that never happened.
Oh
And
man.
journalists reporting stories that don't have actual actual sources and all this stuff. It's like we're so dumb in some ways, And
Yeah. Well, our expert, and that's where like we always talk about this. It's a mindset shift, like
yeah,
more than any other, because it starts with the expectations, like on the AI that are different from the human being. Like as humans hallucinate and misremember and misinterpret, like all it's such a mirror right
Mm.
now,
That's a good
right?
show. Good point.
And what I was trying to find a book, I forget what it was, but it might have been Think Like a Freak. Um, but it talks about this like continuous S curve as
Yeah.
like just S curve after S curve after S curve as growth. Um, but yeah, I mean, how often do we hear the art of war like cited as like a inspiring book?
Hmm.
Um, and then you think about how people focus on competition, and it's like built on scarcity, and we are moving into a world of abundance. And if we're not already there, for most people, in terms of like access to a level of intelligence on our phones that we just never had before. And that's the
Well,
thing, like you have to like step one as a leader is understand that I have this in my hand. Like you cannot keep me from an all-knowing, like
mm.
all-powerful like being to check you on everything that you're saying to me,
So
right?
how much, right? How much of business? Sorry, because I get very excited about this topic. How much of business, commerce, particularly commerce, has relied on this mismatch, right, between the seller who knows more than the buyer. Now we started to see digital shooting that down, and even HubSpot and Inbound have done, content marketing itself has done an awful lot to claw back our positions as consumers. Well, now what we're saying is here, right? The educational piece here, or the knowledge piece is a better way to put it, is now table stakes. Everybody knows everything. So you cannot hide. You cannot pretend you know something. You don't have any cards that the consumer doesn't. So that's the only thing you're left with now is that creativity, is that innovation. So when you're a four-man squad in military terms behind enemy lines, you can't ring up the general and say, well, what are we going to do now? So they spend an awful lot of time teaching those guys to figure out what to do on the fly. And that's exactly
Standard
what,
operating
yeah,
procedures.
this is exactly what we're talking about, right? Within your
Yeah.
organization. We're going to fail, right? Unless you do this, you result in what we've just been talking about. You result in this concrete thinking, processified dinosaur. You're effectively making yourself obsolete. You're effectively creating a scenario where your business is going to become obsolete. The only way around is creativity. I'm calling it that for the minute because that's what stuck to my mind. But
Yeah.
is to have teams or even individuals solving the problems that the business faces, be it competition, be it market forces, be it whatever it's going to be on
Right.
the ground, because
Yeah.
you've created, you've got rid of learned helplessness. They're not helpless. They know what they're doing. They can take risks. You've educated them. They're psychologically safe, so they will take the risk. And you've created this environment where they can act.
Yeah. And if you're
That's,
having trouble with that word creativity because you're not an artist or you're not a
mm,
creator, whatever,
mm,
right? I'll always say it's creative application of the knowledge that you have,
yeah. I don't mean the ability to draw or sing or any of those things necessarily,
I mean, it
although
could
you may
be,
well have those things as well.
right? Well, it could be. I mean, we all have had some fun on some whiteboards, I think, to try it. Like, can you explain the problem that like so well, like in order to build trust? And I guess we're talking about, sales and customer experience right now, but like every buyer wants the same thing. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be understood, and they want their expectations met. No matter the business, no matter the vertical, and like all you have to do as a human, right? And this is where humans are better, right? Is say, "Oh, I was just talking to Tony yesterday, and he's dealing with something very similar," right? And then you apply whatever it could be 1% or like 100% of what the previous conversation was, just to get people thinking differently. Because at the same time, they're losing all their like critical thinking skill,
Mm,
and but we want to figure things out. as human beings. We want the answers very badly. So, but we don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily work out. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Mm.
Everybody wants a playbook, but unless you help implement and like configure the playbook for the unique situations, that's where like the four guys in the middle of a minefield, right, need to operate very differently than the four guys like with like firing squads at the end on the end lines or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And that's the human, that's what you mean by creativity. Like, can you use the knowledge you certainly do have, because everybody has experiences, right, that can be shared that somebody else does not have. And all you have to do is find a way to like facilitate conversation and thinking from that. And that's where we're so used to leadership. Like, this is the discovery playbook. Like, and it's, even though everybody hates the experience, when you're on the other side of that and you can't get somebody to go off script, like for your save your life, right? It's like,
They won't
there's
even
just a
tell you how much it's going
screen,
to cost. What's
right?
that all about?
There's a screen that's up. They literally cannot move forward until they fill in the answer for that question. This has happened with me at HubSpot before. I'm like, I know what's happening on your side right now. I'm not going to give you the answer to that question because it doesn't matter. It's not relevant. And we are beyond that, right? And if I can't get you to break script, we might as well just end the call right now, right? There's no value being created, right? And
So this is so, it's so vital that this is actually what I was talking to Christopher about, or within his group. We were talking about selling, and I'm talking about how pointless what we learned in sales school is, you know. And to be fair, there's a lot of agreement. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't sort of tilting at windmills or anything. Everybody was in the same place. But think about it. You've just said it there again, right? Think about the experience that you want. It confounds me that we will willingly, as salespeople, play the part of somebody we would detest if we were facing them. If we faced ourselves, when we were stuck to our script, and I'm not saying it's anybody's fault, by the way. I'm talking about the organization's perspective here, right? They've taught you, they've built that HubSpot playbook that you can't advance until you put the answer in, and so on and so on. It's absolutely insane. Value first, right?
yeah,
So I have a thing and you want that thing. That's the basis of our relationship, right? Clearly behooves me to provide you with that value and get what I want in return as quickly, as painlessly, and as easily as possible. Value first.
yeah. And this is
It's
why,
not
like,
a fight anymore. It's just not a fight. It can't be a fight. It's not a battle anymore. The language of sales is so old fashioned, close the deal. Well, what does
yeah,
that mean?
yeah, it's definitely not closed. Like, maybe that's why our handoffs suck,
Yeah,
right? Because we
exactly.
think we're
Well, I've
done.
closed. I'm gone. Yeah, I've
Right.
done my bit. It's up to you now.
Yeah. So much of value first right now is turning into like, can we just replace this language? Because I'm at the point where, like, the only reason, like, humans are not naturally predisposed to treat people in this way. So, what has to happen in order for them to do that? They have to not see the person as a human on the other side,
Now,
right? And
can
de-
open, worms everywhere.
dehumanizing the process is what we're doing when we call them leads and MQLs and SQLs. And if I'm on the phone or I'm email or we're talking in person, like when I'm looking at the playbook and I care more about that than the answers that you're giving me, that's because I've got lead numbers to hit. I've got discovery calls to book and complete. And if my data is not complete, I'm not doing, somebody's telling me I'm not doing my job, I'm not hitting my goals. And this is where it's definitely not the fault of the people on that call. It's the systems. And that's where Value First is trying to get at. Like, if we cannot root out this dehumanization of the process, of course it's going to persist, because there are numbers that we're used to that support the 1,000 to 100 to 10. in that moment right there, like already dehumanizes the process,
Yeah.
so that if I have somebody to call, like the only way I do things that I would hate done to me is if I don't know, like I don't feel the person on the other side of
Yeah,
it.
we haven't got the connection. Exactly. This,
Right.
this is my biggest problem with RevOps. That there's as a concept, there's this belief, understanding. I don't know. Somebody sold us this thing where manipulating these numbers are what are going to generate better results for the organization, right? Even from the perspective we talk about alignment within RevOps and don't talk about the people. I don't know any RevOps experts, and I love all the RevOps experts that I know deeply, enormous amount of respect and affection. I don't mean that, but I don't have conversations with them about people, about salespeople. You know, the numbers that we talk about, the velocities and the ratios and all this sort of stuff. These should be ways of inspiring the person to do better. You can't necessarily impact on that number without taking the person into the equation. And if you sit one side with your spreadsheet and you look at this, and if we can just do this by 15% and such, and this will drop through and so on and so on, it's complete nonsense. Unless you factor that into the sales team, the customer success team, the product people, the delivery people, unless that whole thing is reflected through the organization, it doesn't work. It absolutely does not work. You can't increase closing ratio by 5% without teaching salespeople how to be more human, without
Yeah.
teaching salespeople how to be more creative, without teaching salespeople they can go off script, without
Yeah.
like Krulak's law says, okay, you're a salesperson in the wild, you're having a conversation with a human, make a decision. Is it the right thing for them? Is it the right thing for us? Cool, let's make it happen. You don't have to come back and fill out a report or ring or get permission or such and such. Let's do business, right? And I think I'm a bit older than you, Chris, but I think we were taught business when I first started in sales. We weren't taught playbooks. We were taught about like mutual benefit, and we were taught about negotiation, and we were taught about all these sorts of things. We have frameworks. I know what a sales process is. The sales process. Think about this. The sales process comes second to the salesperson, not the other way around, right? The sales process is a consequence of the person. It's a consequence of the way your sales team act. Your sales team act and you're able to measure their impact. You don't put it together and then get them. You can't connect it back up the other way. You can't shake a salesperson with your sales process. The sales process is almost dumb
Yeah.
because it's a consequence of the activities that the salespeople undertake. The activities they take is a consequence of the culture. The activities they take is a consequence of their creativity. The activities that they take is a consequence of you teaching them through questioning where they can go, what they can do, what's right for them, what's right for the client. And there is so much bollocks, excuse my language,
Yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, out there about playing your cards and holding this and not doing that and win and lose win, and
It's all
it's
scarcity, like
it's
focused,
utter
right?
exactly 100%. It's about that mismatch. So I
Yeah.
can only sell when I have something. Even Donald Trump talks about this. I won't go any further than that. I'm not talking politics, but he talks about the cards that they have. Ukraine
Hmm.
don't have the cards that Russia has. We're never moving forward if that's what it always comes down to.
Yeah. And like, I want to help you RevOps people understand this is the challenge that you signed up for, is to design a system of internal process without making it about the internal process.
Exactly.
And the one practice that I love to pick on, because it just makes no sense, like at all, among the many that don't make sense, but this one, when we have to build workflows that force people through stages that they did not do,
Yeah.
right? Like, if there was no, like, that situation where the best salespeople will, like, that, okay, are you ready to go forward today? I mean, usually I got to do this other stuff, but
I'm
we
not
could
going to
get a
stand in the
verbal.
way of your purchase.
We
I can't
we
put.
could get a verbal right now. So this price
Let's
sounds
do it.
good. Let me just call like my boss to make sure, and then we'll put the deal in like after that, right? There was no quoting process. There was no like stages, right? So why in the world, like as soon as it becomes just to make our metrics work or our measurements work or our reports work, not to mention like it's not linear, right? A big part of the value path um, is about, can we create the reality in our systems that match the very nonlinear reality to be able to support things that have been always getting in the way, either handoffs or right as we're trying to activate the deal, is how I'm referring to closed one now. It's
Mm,
activation, it's not
mm,
closed.
mm.
Like that moment where it's like, oh, they've been so bought in, like they're ready to go. They're a qualified opportunity. But there's this 10% part of the conversation where it's like, this is the kind of thing that's going to kill this deal. And they have no idea what it's about. They're an audience. They're a subscriber. They're like so far at the top of the funnel
Yeah.
when it comes to that specific topic. And when you can't differentiate between those two, you're going to give them like, okay, so if it's at this point in the deal and we treat them as overall bought in and understanding, we're going to give them this super technical like white paper when they're seeing the topic for the first time and they need something from like top of funnel to start to really open up their eyes so that they can bring some other expert in to the conversation. And like when we try to apply these labels and stages again onto human beings that don't act, don't walk and talk in this way, like that's what, the best salespeople I know, they understand that, and they are constantly in an agile place of like, you know what, this part I get that you're not seeing it, but you said that you wanted to bring your CTO in at some point. Now's that time. Can we get him on the call right now? Let's just stop here, right? And how do you build that like contextual process into the system? That's the beauty of AI right now, in my opinion,
Yeah.
is it can help you do that, but you have to give it those guardrails,
Yeah.
right?
So what we're doing, and that's such an eye opener. The way that you've put that across, we're trying to find neutrinos. You can't see them. They've no mass and no charge. So we can speculate that they exist, right? Or we're trying to find Neptune. We don't have the glass that allows us to see it yet, but we know from Kepler's laws that there's something there that we expect there to be a thing there. So what we do, we create models. We create models, then we use those models to try and measure what's going on, to try and improve. But the problem with sales, particularly, is the models have taken over. It's exactly what you said. So if on the other hand we were able to genuinely observe what the people were doing and create models based off that observation, not off our predisposed ideas, not off what we thought was happening, not off what we think should happen, like that ridiculous thing about forcing somebody through all the deal phases so it doesn't mess your calculations up. If we were genuinely able, scientifically able to measure what goes on at like a macro level, you know, this is the other thing that we do with these statistics. We take one salesperson and their results, and then we think we know all there is to know about that salesperson or the product or the market or anything else. It's crazy.
There's our repeatable process. Build it in,
Yeah,
folks.
that it is.
Right.
Bang. It's so. It's a really good point, and the whole AI question. Not only then empowering the salesperson and the customer. We've both arrived at the table. We both know exactly everything that we need to know. Great. Let's have a sensible grown-up adult conversation. But also in empowering the organization. So we can now look and say, actually, where we thought this thing was happening, we thought our salespeople were really good at closing. Turns out they were really good at helping. Well, who knew? So let's turn all our efforts to helping more, not
Yes.
not artificially trying to show, can you sign the
Yeah.
deal by the 28th?
Right.
Well, the only person that's going to help is you, clearly.
Yeah.
I'm more than
Oh
happy to
man.
help you. I'm more than happy to help you. Well, why should I sign it by the 28th? Oh,
I look forward to that shift because that means you're using humans at the beginning of the process and using AI at the end, like
yes,
which is
yes.
completely flipped from what people are thinking about it right now. It's been fun to get back together, man.
Good to be back.
I'm glad we picked this back up. So much of what we're talking about like starts and ends and moves through leadership. We've got to find a way to get through. I do think more and more waking up to what's going on. AI is making it very hard to ignore your process problems, your data problems, your human problems. And you don't get to solve it any way you feel like. That's the fun part of AI. Like I think with SaaS and software, you could get very opinionated on the way you want to solve it and then find that specific solution where AI is just going to be like, what? No,
Yeah,
like, no, like
yeah.
MCP, we're doing it this way. This is the efficient way. This is the way that people like, right? I think behavioral analysis and the power of unstructured data being accessible is going to be just huge. So that's why we're going to be here each week moving forward. Finishing, these 7 principles. Next week, we'll be talking about, let's see here, removing barriers rather than adding pressure. Uh, the end of the month stuff, we got to cut that out, folks.
Artificial barriers. We make
Yes,
them up. We
yes,
create our own problems and then spend the rest of our lives dealing with them.
yeah. So until next time, next Monday at the same time, we hope everybody has a great week. Thanks so much, Tony.
Yep. I'll see you then. Thanks, Chris.